Fantastic Four First Steps is out, and this marks the fourth Fantastic Four film, if you're not counting the one that never came out. And it's no secret that the Fantastic Four have not exactly had the best track record as far as movies go. In fact, I've been working on a worst superhero movies video on the previous three films. It was supposed to be out this week, but that's because it was just going to be on Fant4stick, but then, like a maniac, I added the other two movies, so the video's like double the length, and I'm going to be out of town next week, so it's going to be late, alright? I'm sorry. But yeah, this movie is actually pretty good, so that's nice. I think Fantastic Four First Steps is a very solid experience. I think it's pretty hard to watch this and have a bad time. But, like, that's kind of the bare minimum of what I expect. Here, it feels like Marvel Studios did their best effort to shave away every impurity from this film. They needed this movie to be solid. And I think that does work, but also, it makes the movie stand out a little less because of it. I will say I love the aesthetic of this movie. I like the retro future vibe. This movie's also set completely in its own universe. You're not going to see any other members of the Avengers show up. They're not going to get mentioned. None of that. This is as close to a standalone MCU movie that you're going to get nowadays. And yeah, part of the fun of the MCU is seeing all the things that are connected, but I think this movie is much better for not having any of that. I really like the distinct visual identity, and that plus the amazing score makes the movie look and feel very different than anything else in this franchise. And I also really like that when the Fantastic Four leave Earth, things immediately feel completely different and alien and scary. But what people really want to know is if the characters are faithful. And I guess so. The thing about the FF is that they've been written by so many different people that aside from a few core traits, it's easy to have a different take on them. Some writers like to make them a little silly, some writers make them a little more serious. It really depends. I think if you ask anybody who their favorite character in this movie was, they'll give you a different answer. So I do think that's a good thing. Like personally, I think Johnny was probably my favorite character. He's great in this movie. And he was the one I was most worried about because I think a lot of people can mess up writing Johnny Storm. He has to have a balance of all of his traits. The layman might think that he's just the funny, sarcastic one, but there really is a lot more to the character. I think on a good day, I would say that Johnny is my favorite member of the Fantastic Four, but that's only if you can get him right, and I think this movie gets him right. He has a even three-way split between being humorous, horny, and heroic, and that is how you get Johnny right. In this story, Johnny has a lot to do, and he ends up being really important. He put a smile on my face. He's definitely my favorite. I think that Susan is also handled incredibly well here. I think that there is a big push to make her a focus in this film. Before the movie came out, I heard that she was basically the closest thing to a main character, and I think that's actually true. She drives the plot, she has the biggest stake in what's happening, and her choices define the narrative. I think a lot of times, writers can tend to just make Sue into the girl character, and they don't really bother giving her a personality or giving her anything to do. This is definitely the case in the old Fantastic Four movies. But a good writer makes her the heart of the family. She keeps everybody in line. She's the playmaker more than anybody else. And I think that's reflected very well here. Fundamentally, I think I could say that this is a Susan Storm story. But then we get to the other two guys, and I'm not going to say that Reed Richards is bad in this movie by any means, but I do think Pedro is being forced to hold back a little bit. Apparently, he wanted to do this transatlantic old Hollywood accent, and they made him not do that. It really would have added a fun element to the character, and it would have made him fit this universe. But I think that since they plan on incorporating these characters into the greater MCU, they didn't want him talking funny. But it really feels like he's playing the most standard version of Reed Richards. He doesn't really have anything that makes him stand out. He doesn't really get a big wow moment like a lot of the other characters do. He also doesn't get to use his powers in any weird ways. He barely uses his powers at all. Now, this isn't really bad. It depends on the flavor of Reed Richards that you prefer. This movie is taking a lot from the Hickman run, and this Reed fits that a lot better. I just wanted something a little more from him. I like when Reed is a little freaky, and I feel like they just don't want to make Pedro Pascal freaky. I will say, though, that I do think Ben is kind of a letdown. I've seen a lot of people say, oh, Sue is my favorite, Johnny's my favorite. I haven't seen a single person say that the Thing is their favorite in this movie. I really want to like this version of Ben Grimm more, but he doesn't really have an impact on the story. His voice also isn't quite right for what I imagine for the character, and that's not really a problem. You can change things about a character. You don't need to have him talk like a cab driver from New York. Again, this movie is going for this retro vibe, so why wouldn't you make that an excuse to have the characters talk like that? This is the perfect setting for the classic Ben Grimm archetype. I don't know why you'd utilize this aesthetic and then just make Reed and Ben talk like a normal modern-day person. In this movie, Ben is fine, but this is the character that should be more than fine. He should be fantastic.
Say that again?
I also think a big problem with this movie is that after watching all the trailers, you can see that a lot of content has been cut. A lot of moments and scenes that were shown off in the trailer that I was really excited for ended up not being in the movie. This little scene of Ben and Sue talking, completely cut. The best shot in any of the trailers right here, also cut. Fucking John Malkovich apparently was supposed to be in this movie. He's in the trailer. He's not in the film. It feels like a lot of things were changed. And I wouldn't say the pacing of the film bothered me, but the editing definitely did. Sometimes there are weird cuts, sometimes I couldn't really tell how much time was passing because characters are wearing the same clothes that they seem to have been wearing in the last day, so you can't really tell what the passage of time is supposed to look like in this story. Now that would normally seem like a nitpick, but if you know the plot of this film, you know that it's really important for you to understand how much time is passing. Again, it feels like the studio did their best to shave away anything that might weigh the movie down, but I would have liked a few extra scenes. It feels like 20 or so minutes were just removed from the story. But as I've been saying, none of these problems make the movie bad for me. At its worst, it's still acceptable. And I haven't even talked about the things I really liked. I think all of the Galactus stuff fucking rocked my ass off. Galactus has the presence required for this story. His scenes feel big, they feel impactful. And the middle of this movie is dominated by a huge sci-fi set piece that I was obsessed with. We've had a lot of Fantastic Four movies at this point, and none of them have really gotten the crazy sci-fi action quite right. But the middle of this movie is just so good. It's fast, it's exciting, it gives all the characters room to shine. All while setting up the threat of Galactus and showing off how cool the Silver Surfer is. Second act of this movie, amazing, great, no complaints. What I really enjoy is this movie's tone after the first half. Tonally, it's a big departure from what a Marvel movie usually feels like. In your average MCU film, the world could be fucking ending, but everybody's still joking around enough to the point where you know everything's gonna be okay in the end. But here, this shit feels pretty serious. It really feels like the world is fucking ending and people are kind of stressed out about it. There's no out-of-place humor, and in the second half it starts to feel kind of like a disaster movie. You know, one of those films from the 2000s where the world is doomed and everybody's just kind of upset and anxious all the time. Yeah, it felt like that, and it was pretty consistent. I thought that was really cool. I think this might be the most tonally consistent Marvel movie we've had since, Winter Soldier, and that's something that really worked for me. So yeah, even if I have minor issues with the characters or the very obvious missing content, I was still very immersed, and I really enjoyed the story being shown. It's really fun to watch these characters try to figure out how to deal with this impossible threat. It is nice that the Fantastic Four finally get an unambiguously good movie, and I really don't think most people will have a problem with this. With this film and Thunderbolt setting the tone for the rest of the MCU, I think it's easy to think that maybe we might finally be back on track. So, I'm going to give Fantastic Fart an 8 out of 10.